Rotarians. So I know Anthony, he is, I've been getting to know him better through the Chamber Connection, and he's been at several of our events. And I put an ask out at one of our speaker events and said, because the gentleman that I was going to have, who was going to help us with how do you tell your Rotary story. So we will have him later. But I said, okay, he mentioned find Rotary clubs. They're great, they're always looking for speakers. So I said, okay, here's a challenge. I have 4 Fridays that I need to fill for speakers. And I got 3. Except, sorry, the gal that I scheduled first didn't show up. I don't know what happened. She was going to talk about great relationships, so maybe she had a bad one. But anyway, not to take anything away from Anthony, Anthony's address today is what is the real impact of climate change and what we can do to stem the tide. Global warming, excuse me, global warming and subsequently climate change is a real threat to our way of life, not just in the future, but today. This presentation introduces the science behind global warming. Imagine there's science behind it, contrary to what our leader thinks. And climate change as well as the projected impacts on the US and the world. In addition, he will introduce simple ways that we can all make a difference and provide examples of how cities, countries, counties, and states are trying to reduce their carbon emissions. Anthony Kinslow II, I apologize, PhD, is the founder and CEO of Gemini Energy Solutions, an energy efficient consulting company. Anthony has a master's and PhD in civil and environmental engineering from Stanford University. His sorry, I apologize. His research focused on identifying the energy-saving potential of specific energy efficiency measures in single-family households. Born in Nashville, Tennessee, and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, Anthony completed his BS in Civil and Environmental Engineering at North Carolina A&T State University. Anthony has been a consultant at the San Francisco International Airport, where he supports their goal of achieving campus energy buildings, conducting of achieving campus-wide net zero energy since 2015. His experience includes designing net zero energy buildings, conducting commercial building energy audits, analyzing utility data, and commissioning building energy management systems. Anthony enjoys mentoring, playing soccer and basketball, completing jigsaw puzzles with his wife Maria, another Stanford PhD, and reading fantasy and science fiction books. So welcome, Anthony. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. Do you want me to? Yeah, right. I guess.
You can't
Am I
believe that.
Am I good right here?
You're great. No, yeah, just the person that blocked the camera.
So the real impact of climate change and what you can do to stem the tide. So before I get into my presentation, Gemini Energy Solutions, I founded this company primarily, one of our missions is to engage, educate, and empower our communities, right? Because unless we are engaged, educated, and empowered, we really can't make a difference. And so my hope for after this presentation is that you feel a little bit more educated and a little bit more empowered to make a difference in your home and in your community. So first, let's get right to it. How does global warming occur? Right? Who is familiar with greenhouses, right? Yeah? Okay, so the idea of a greenhouse is solar rays come through the windows, and because they turn into heat, they have a harder time escaping. In that instance, all of a sudden, you have an area that is warming considerably thanks to the sun. Right? The same thing is actually happening on Earth. and it's called the greenhouse effect. And it's called the greenhouse effect because there are chemicals that we are producing into the atmosphere that are called greenhouse gases. And they have the same effect as a greenhouse, where solar rays come down, hit the earth, turn into heat, and then have a challenge to escape back into the atmosphere. And so you can see this kind of like a barrier of that is slowly warming the planet. And so that brings us to the first thing. What is the difference between global warming and climate change, right? You hear these two words, but what is the difference? Global warming is this. It is the actual warming of the planet's atmosphere. Climate change is the effects of those warming, right? So what occurs due to the warming in the atmosphere, that is climate change. So when you're talking about global warming, it's something different than climate change. And to make sure that you all understand that when you're having conversations with people. Well, what causes global warming? What produces these greenhouse gases? As we all know, fossil fuels, natural gas, oil, coal, these things produce greenhouse gases. Cows, they're passing gas, that produces methane. That is a lot. That actually is quite a bit of a greenhouse gas that goes into the atmosphere. If you drive down 101 or 5 down all the way down to LA, you'll see miles of cow farms, right? That's a lot of methane being produced. And so when you hear conversations about going vegan and eating less meat, that actually is critical, or not critical, but that actually does make a difference in terms of your impact on global warming. And I say global warming, right? Your impact on global warming, not on climate change, because climate change results due to global warming. And then, of course, deforestation. I mean, I'm sure most of y'all have heard about the Amazon fires, but deforestation is happening all around the world. And that, because trees bring in this carbon dioxide and hold it for us, the more we take away, the less capacity the Earth has to suck up the carbon dioxide that we're producing. A study came out that showed that if we plant millions of trees, then we could drastically mitigate global warming, which in that case produces the devastating effects of climate change that we're looking for. So there's some direct impacts of global warming. Warmer water, loss of ice caps. We were talking about that at the table just now. And you can see just right here, since 1979, the dramatic reduction in solar ice caps. You'll hear a lot about the polar bears and how they're really becoming in danger because of the lack of ice. And then of course, heat waves. We've had them here. Europe has been seeing some record highs in heat and temperatures. And we've had some of the hottest days on record over the last 5 years. And that's only going to continue because the heat that is being produced from our sun is not escaping as fast anymore. And it's just accumulating. And so it becomes a slippery slope. Now, due to global warming, what are the primary effects of climate change? And so, as you can see here, this image is actually, can you replay it? Okay, so essentially this was what you're seeing is the effects of Hurricane Dorian on the Caribbean. And you see the yellow area is where land used to be right now. So this was just from this hurricane and the flooding that occurred from that. What you have now, because of global warming, is warmer waters. And as a result of warmer waters, you have increased storms. So it's the size and intensity of the frequency and intensity of storms, hurricanes, any major hurricanes, tornadoes, these natural events increase in frequency and they increase in size. So now we're going to start seeing level 4, category 4, category 5 more frequent. Right? It'll start as a tropical storm. You'll be watching the news. It'll start as a tropical storm. And as it comes closer and closer to warm waters, because these waters are getting warmer, the size of the hurricanes are going to increase. And you're going to start seeing category 4, category 5. You talked about what just missed Florida, right? We all saw what happened in Puerto Rico a few years ago. The floods in Houston, it's been flooded multiple times over the past decade. That is only going to continue. What does that mean for our infrastructure? What does that, how much money do we have to keep rebuilding? If we're rebuilding every 2 years, what does that do to the economics of our country? Drought. What comes from drought, right? Loss of food. It's going to get harder and harder as our population is increasing, we're losing some of the capabilities of feeding that population. Higher floodplains. Across the country, we have what we call 100-year floodplains, right? That is, you're supposed to not build in these areas, or there's a high risk of building in these areas. Maybe you won't get home insurance because you're in those areas. Well, those maps were based on what was going on 50 years ago, what we were expecting for rain and natural disasters 30 years ago, 20 years ago. That's going to change. And so when you think about where you live, where you're building homes, homes that are on beachfront properties, what's going to impact that? Airports that are right near the water. And then loss of biodiversity. This one is something that people aren't aware of. With warmer waters and the increase of the cold water from the solar ice caps, what you're having is a change in pH levels of your oceans. A lot of animals are very sensitive to this change. Coral reefs are very sensitive to this change. Clams, mussels, these kind of animals are very sensitive to the change in pH level in the ocean. As a result, we're going to lose the capacity to have these animals flourish. All of a sudden now, we're going to start dealing with more and more incidences of diseases in the animal populations in the ocean. And that's not just the ocean. Forest fires, drought, all these things impact also land animals. Lack of natural habitat and the change of their natural habitat. What are they used to? We can adapt to things. Right? We have that ability. We've shown that ability to adapt to things. Other animals can adapt to things also, but not in such a quick turnaround. Next. And so the first domino of climate change, refugees. In Europe, we've all seen the news. It's roughly about, between refugees and asylum seekers, over 1 million people have been trying to get into Europe, right? And we've also know about the news of people trying to come, asylum seekers coming into the United States from Central America and South America. Due to climate change, rising sea levels, the devastation of larger storms, the anticipated minimum is 100 million refugees. What is that going to do with our systems? Can we handle that? Can we handle 100 million people who are displaced? And it's not going to just be the Middle East. It's going to be islands all across the world. Our coastal lands, United States included, Miami. Where is everybody going to go with Miami? We all saw what happened with New Orleans. How many people got displaced from one storm in New Orleans? Right? What happens when it is just too much? When our country as a whole becomes smaller, the land mass of our country becomes smaller. How do we deal with that? And I call that the first domino. I call it the first domino because once we start having that, other things happen. Tensions increase. We've seen the rise of very conservative views of country-first attitude in America and all throughout Europe and in South America. And that is correlated with the increase of refugees and asylum seekers. You look at Europe and who's being elected there and what they're saying to their people about why they want to be elected. It's to our country first, our people first. We're hearing that today in the news. What does that lead to? How does having 100 million exacerbate that? And let y'all just think about that. What are the difficulties that come from that? Our engineering infrastructure. How do we deal with that change of population? That overnight is not something that we project an increase of 2% of population increase in San Mateo. What happens when we have to have 20,000 people coming? Traffic's bad now. Right? So, all right. what must we do? I'm kind of giving you an idea. This is the impacts of climate change, and think of it as dominoes. One thing falls, all the other structures that we have in place start getting impacted from that. The structures and policies and engineering infrastructures that we have in place for a certain capacity of people start getting impacted by that. But now, what do we need to do to stop that? That is, reduce our demand and our consumption of fossil fuels. This is just a general graph, but essentially you're seeing that our energy consumption, what we consume, needs to be renewable energy, overwhelmingly. Nuclear doesn't necessarily produce greenhouse gases, but there are other issues with nuclear that people can argue about. Natural gas, there's still a lot of uses for that, and it's going to be very hard to get that small percent out, but we can drastically reduce, and there's reports out there on how to do that. A professor at Stanford University, Mark Jacobs, came out with a report of how do we get 100% renewable in the United States. Right, so we know how to do it from an engineering perspective. That is not the barrier anymore. We have the technology to do that. The challenge is us. We're the ones standing in the way. And then what's the deadline? You know, we gotta make changes. We gotta reduce our fossil fuels. What is that deadline? 450 parts per million is what a lot of scientists are saying is when we hit that, then we're in real trouble. It's gonna be really hard to pull back from that. All right? Over the past 50 years, we've been steadily increasing. And what you see in that red is the Earth breathes, essentially. So the earth, the trees, plants, etc., they breathe in CO2 and breathe it out, right? And seasonal impacts. And so that's what you see as it goes up and down, up and down. That's the red. The black is your average throughout those seasonal impacts, right? And what you see is an increase. 2015, we hit 408. We're at 408, 410 right now. If this increases at that current rate, we have about 13 years, 2033. That's our deadline if we are continue as business as usual. The world has realized this. The Paris Climate Agreement that we've pulled out of was one of the first examples, was a key example of the world saying we need to make a change. But even that isn't necessarily enough. But 2033, that's the date you should have in your mind, that if we start, that's when things really need to be different. So what does that mean? Well, we've seen drastic change like this before. Right? 1900 to 1913. On the left, the whole street is full with cars and buggies. 1913, there's one horse somewhere in that of all the cars. We've had drastic change before in this country and in the world. And we've also had great achievements in that same time. In 1961, JFK, we choose to go to the moon. And if anybody watched the Democratic debates last night, Joe Biden actually quoted JFK in this same speech. 8 years later, we had our first man on the moon. We literally figured out how to send people outside of the Earth's atmosphere where they could and land on another celestial body. We didn't know how to do that at the time when he said that. We figured it out. We're at a better advantage now. We know how to do it. Can we remove the human barriers that are preventing us from doing it? During that time, there was a lot of uprise. There was the civil rights movement going on. The country was very divided then. People say the country has never been more divided than now. I don't know, that seems like it was pretty divided back then. It was actually legally divided. Segregation was legal then, right? So we had the ability and we've done it before. And there's some evidence too that we're on the cusp of making some real changes. This graph right here shows your US energy consumption. And as you can see, in the past, in the 1960s onward, for US GDP to grow, energy consumption had to grow. In other words, for our country to thrive, we had to consume more energy. In about 2008, that decoupled, thanks to certain federal policies, and that decoupled. And now our U.S. can thrive without having to consume more energy. That's a very important point. The financials of renewable energy are starting to change. This is this is about 2 years old, but you can see energy efficiency is the most cost-effective way to in terms of cents per kilowatt hour. But you can see wind, natural gas utility, all that is more impactful than coal. It's cheaper, more cost-effective than coal. So we're moving away, and renewable energy is just as competitive as any other source of energy generation. So we're seeing signs of change, and because of that, we're also seeing an increase in expenditures. Energy efficiency expenditures from utility companies over from 2008 to 2012 increased $3 billion. And that increase has continued. It's projected to reach $12 billion in the next few years. Where people in private companies are starting to invest in energy efficiency. Right? There's an economic incentive, there's an economic reason. It makes good business sense to do that. There's change in politics. Cities, our major cities are starting to come up with climate action plans. Other smaller cities are coming up with targets of greenhouse emission reductions, greenhouse gas emissions, excuse me. Now, the challenge is some of them are very aggressive, and some of them, you can see these time ranges are pretty far out. So how do we, we're in a good step politically, right? From on a state by state, on a city by city, things are starting to change. And lastly, there's social evidence of change, that there's something that's coming. Protests in DC, the pipeline protests. People, for the first time in my lifetime, I saw people having dogs sick them. Some of you are a little older, so you saw that during the civil rights movement. You saw that as a child then. So people were caring so much about an issue that they were risking their own bodily harm because of it. And we're starting to see that now. So, so what are the barriers to, what are the barriers to the change we need, right? There's really 4 I identify as what's stopping us from really taking that next step to landing a man on the moon, to going from all horse and buggy to automated vehicles. First one is climate policies without teeth. Many of you grandchildren probably love How to Train a Dragon, right? And you have this one dragon, and his name is, I think, Toothless. And he was always seen as the Night Fury. He was the most dangerous dragon at all. And in the beginning of the scene, he smiles, and there's no teeth. And that's really what we're seeing a lot of policy out there is they look great, but they aren't enforcing it with, there's no, if you don't follow this rule, the impacts and the dangers to your business is less so than maybe following the rule. It maybe costs more for you to follow the rule than just to take the fines, right? So how are we really trying to push people if the fines are such that we'll just take the fines and we'll keep doing business as usual, right? Federal policies. We currently have an administration who denies the science behind climate change, behind global warming. Right? We have an administration who actively says that is not the case, and actively says they want to bring back coal. Right? And on top of that, there are still incentives and money going towards oil and gas, coal and oil companies to help them become more cost competitive with solar and hydro and wind. So right now, our tax dollars are going to these companies who, as we all know, are making billions in profits to help them help their business case to us. And the last two, lack of education. There's not much known out here about that. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Energy efficiency is the same as solar? Maybe, maybe not. You ask someone, and I tell someone I do an energy efficiency consulting, usually the next question is, oh, is this solar? Right? These are different things, but as a society, we still don't have a strong basis, a strong foundation of understanding about energy efficiency, about renewable energy, about the potentials and what the benefits of it, right? And then the last one is something that's hard to hear, but we have an inability to deal with short-term pain. The realities are, if we started working to fight global warming 50 years ago, it would have been a lot cheaper than it is now. To do the things that we have to do, it's going to cost money. It's going to be uncomfortable. And there's going to be short-term losses as well. And we right now don't have the fortitude to say it's still worth it. So I want to switch over to what we can do, right? But before I do, and there's a key aspect to this, and that is to understand your impact when you make a change. And for you to understand that is site energy versus source energy. Anybody seen this before? Yeah. So site energy is where we are now. This is a site. Energy is being consumed in the lights. The HVAC system is keeping us cool. That is site energy. That is energy being consumed where we are. But source energy is the energy it takes to produce the energy we're using right here. And the reality is that there is a lot of losses from source energy to site energy. If we work our back away, there's losses due to transmission lines. When you step up from a substation or step down so that when we plug something in, the voltage in our outlets are not the same voltage that's coming from the generation, right? There's a lot lower. That's losses there when that transforms. You go back through transmission line again from the substation, losses again. Generating energy, there are losses. The best coal plants in the world are 32% efficient. 70% of the energy in that coal, for instance, is being wasted. Solar panels, 20% efficient, 22% efficiency. Of course, solar, we're not losing any of that, right? But we're not fulfilling the full energy of what we're burning or what we're gathering. And so when you think about turning off your lights for a little bit, it's a few dollars saved for you, but that has an order of magnitude, an impact on what needs to be generated. And so I think that's very important to understand, is that your site energy, what you use in site energy, isn't what is being consumed. It's 1/3 of what's being consumed. Right? So when you turn off your lights and you say, oh, it's only a few dollars, what does it matter? No, that matters to the generation. Okay. And so there's 3 ways to reduce your energy consumption. I want everybody to say this with me. C-E-G.
C-E-G.
One more time. C-E-G.
C-E-G.
Conservation, efficiency, generation. I think all of us are familiar with reduce, reuse, recycle. Well, CEG, that's what you should think about in terms of sustainability. Conservation is the first thing you should do. That is turning off your lights. That is reducing the time that appliance is running. That you are reducing how much you drive, or maybe carpooling more. Instead of having 2 cars going, you got 1. Right? This is reduction, conservation. This is the first and best thing, and often the cheapest thing you can do. Next is efficiency. A little bit often more expensive than conservation. Efficiency is changing your light bulbs to LED light bulbs, reducing the amount of power it takes to deliver the same amount of output. And then lastly, generation. That is solar panels. That is also the most costly way to reduce your energy consumption, but it is better, as we saw, than coal. in other ways. So if you're putting solar panels in your house, that's great. But you shouldn't do that until you've done conservation and efficiency, CEG. Next. How much do your appliances use? Right? Do you understand that? There are websites and availabilities. I have put a paper here for y'all to take a picture of so that you can understand what your appliances are using. And you can click. Your set box, your DVR, etc., actually uses more energy than a new refrigerator. People aren't aware of that, right? Let's talk about education. What is the major consumptions in your home? Find out about that. How do you turn them off? And second to last thing is vampire loads. A lot of appliances are drawing energy out of your outlets even when they're not on. And the paper that I brought has a list of them and what that could mean cost for you. And there are devices, timers that you can plug in, smart plug strips that can turn off that power drain from you. That's a simple, easy way so that when you're away from home, maybe you want your light on for security reasons. Well, you can put a timer there and it'll come on at a certain time, hours, and turn on. These are simple, very inexpensive ways to reduce your energy consumption. And then lastly, understanding your energy bill. You get charged for in California, your time of use, so when you're using energy, but also how much energy you use at one time. It's called a demand charge. That demand charge goes higher or lower depending on what your demand is at any given 15-minute interval. So if you're turning on your TV, your washing machine, your dishwasher, you're cooking at the same time, all that at the same time, that's a high demand. That means you're getting charged a higher amount for electricity. And you only need to do it once in a month, and that's what your demand is. So spread out things. Do it during non-peak hours. Right? And the reason they charge more is because they have to bring on less clean energy generation to deal with those peak hours. And that costs more money for them. So they pass that on to you. So bringing on a coal-fired plant to deal with a peak load is more expensive than using the wind turbines and the solar energy that they already have. And so, because they have to buy more expensive energy, they make you using that energy during that time more expensive. And so those are really the three things: the vampire loads, understanding your energy bill, and vampire loads, understanding your appliances, your energy bill, and conservation, efficiency, generation. And I'll end with that.
What are peak hours?
So peak hours change, but I think right now it's between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. And you can think about it as when people are coming home and they're turning on everything. Everybody gets home around the same time range, and that is they're coming on, turning on lights. In a lot of areas, Bay Area not so much. They're turning on air conditioning. Or heat, electric, if you have electric heating, etc. So those times when about 4 to 9 p.m. is around peak hours. And they also tell you on your electricity bill. So you can look on your bill and it'll tell you when your peak hours are. Specifically because it changes by what rate you have.
I liked your slide in particular between 1900 and 1913, the change from horsepower to combustion engines to automobiles. It's a dramatic change in a short period of time and a huge technology change. As you and I discussed briefly, it's long seemed to me that as a society we're missing one of the best investments, the biggest business payoff potential in transitioning into sustainable energy, away from fossil fuels and into, I'd like to know what other sustainable energies we have, because ultimately all the energy comes from the sun, but transitioning to a sustainable energy infrastructure is the investment, it seems to me, of our lifetimes, and our children's lifetimes, and our grandchildren's lifetimes. And the failure to do that is increasing that pain already. that short-term pain that you mentioned is increasing that short-term pain already. We're seeing it in droughts, we're seeing it in stronger hurricanes, we're seeing it in so many things. The city of Miami is flooding every month. So that's just my observation, and I appreciate your presentation very much.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's interesting, most people are aware of solar and wind as renewable, but there's also tidal, there's wave power, there's a lot of geothermal, so there's other methods that are being used effectively throughout the country and the world.
Do you have any other suggestions, Anthony? You talk about what we can do and the things that we have to be aware of. You also referenced not only this country, other countries where we may not have the political will and policies they're working against. Is there anything else we can do as individuals and therefore hopefully as a group to make a difference at that level? Because you know, we can do all of these kinds of things, but in the big scope of things, if these things don't, you know, people don't understand if they don't get the science, if they don't recognize before it's too late. You know, what we're doing is great, but it's kind of just forestalling what's going to happen here. Do you have any other suggestions of what we could do to try to make an even bigger impact on those kinds of decisions?
Yeah. I think there's two things. One is discussions, having discussions with people, changing and talking to them about the seriousness of this. Explaining the difference between greenhouse, global warming and climate change. You know, there's science behind why this is. This isn't just, oh, people think that things are warming. We understand, and we understand that this is happening. We can measure it. So that's one thing, having discussions and trying to really get people on board. The other thing is, I mean, voting, essentially. And I say that, and people say that all the time, but really what it is what is your priority? When you're listening to a candidate, you have a priority of things that you care about. And a lot of people will say, they care about this issue of mine, and this is my priority. And I don't like a lot of the other stuff, but they really are good on this policy. What is your priority with the candidates you're voting for? What are they talking about? Are they talking about some other issues, or are they talking about we really need to do climate change? And so when I say vote, I'm not just saying going to the polls, but who you vote for and what their priorities is really makes a difference. And really there's a discussion, people argue whether or not contacting your congressperson or your state official makes a difference or not. My feeling is whether it changes their mind or not, it doesn't hurt. Right? So I'll leave with that.